The moment I saw my handmade quilt, meant as a Christmas gift, used as a dog blanket, something inside me cracked. I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I simply smiled and started gathering proof. Letters, bank statements, and one very old will they hoped I'd forgotten. My silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. And this was only the beginning. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. The envelope was pristine, its surface smoother than anything I remembered touching in years. It waited for me at the bottom of the mailbox, tucked between grocery flyers and a donation plea from the Veterans Home. I turned it over. My name, Margie Holland, was misspelled. Again, no return address. Just a snowflake embossed square in the top left corner, like it came from a store, not a person. I opened it slowly, my fingers trembling only because they'd stopped expecting surprises. Inside was a simple Christmas invitation. December 23rd, 6:00 p.m., 7827 Waverly Place. Dress festive. That was it. No love Isolde. No looking forward to seeing you, Mom. Just times, numbers, and sterile intent. 15 years since a real conversation. 15 years since my daughter called me anything but an obligation. And now this? I stood on my front steps, staring at it. A neighbor drove past and waved. I didn't wave back. I felt like I was holding a stranger's mistake. 15 years? And not even a mom? I whispered, pressing the flap closed again. Last Christmas, I sent a package. A quilt I'd sewn by hand. Navy flannel on one side, patches of their childhood clothes on the other. It took me 6 months to finish. I wrapped it gently, printed their address, and mailed it without a note. I thought the quilt would speak for me. Warmth. Time. Memory. 2 weeks later, it landed back on my porch. Return to sender, scribbled in red ink across the box like a wound. I never opened it again. I didn't need to. I stuffed it into the hall closet beside unused wrapping paper and my husband's old cane. Now this invitation, so impersonal, so deliberate, stirred something I couldn't name. Dread. Or maybe worse, the dull itch of curiosity. I walked to that closet, pulled the box out, and opened it just a crack. The flannel inside was still soft, still waiting. I folded the wrapping paper carefully, like it might be needed again. Gareth. It was probably Gareth. My son-in-law had a habit of making decisions as if he were the family's CEO. I'd never known a man to control dinner seating like it was a boardroom chart. I tilted the envelope under the kitchen light and squinted. It's not her handwriting, I said out loud, though no one was there to hear it. Isolde always looped her G's. This was blocky, decisive. Gareth's style, not that it mattered. Whoever wrote it had their reasons. Still, something gnawed at me. If Gareth sent it, was Isolde even aware? Or worse, did she just agree silently like always? The invitation didn't ask me to come, it informed me. I went to the bedroom and opened my closet. The blue cardigan still had the tag. I'd bought it on clearance 4 years ago, just in case someone asked me to something. It was soft, practical, safe. I tried it on, then tugged it back off. I laid it on the bed and stared at it. Then, on instinct, I opened the nightstand drawer. Inside, beside old receipts and a dead battery, was the pepper spray. I checked the nozzle, still functional. I wasn't sure what I was preparing for, dinner or disaster. I folded the cardigan and set it aside, next to a small red clutch I hadn't touched in years. I couldn't tell if I was packing armor or hope. The letter was older than the cardigan, older than the quilt. I kept it in the Bible, page 107, right under Psalms. My husband's handwriting had faded, but the weight of his words had not. It was a letter he wrote me 10 years ago, when the silence with Isolde was still new, and our grief was still raw. He had written it after their last visit, when Isolde had left without saying goodbye. The note was filled with compassion and warnings. She may not understand your love, Margie, he wrote, but love her anyway. Just don't lose yourself trying to be accepted. I read it every December. Some years it made me cry. Other years, like now, it made me feel less alone. At the bottom, in firm, unwavering script, he'd penned, "Go, but never beg." I closed the Bible and slid the letter back in place. Then I stood up and said aloud to the empty room, "Let's see what ghosts they've resurrected this time." The rideshare dropped me at the curb, its headlights dimming as it pulled away into the early evening fog. I stepped out holding a plastic-wrapped bouquet I'd grabbed from the gas station, a last-minute attempt to appear thoughtful. The poinsettias looked tired, their red already leaning brown. Still, I adjusted the ribbon and approached the house I once called home. Isolde opened the door. She didn't smile, didn't step aside, just stared and said, "You came." No exclamation, no warmth. Behind her, Gareth crossed the hallway with a glass of something dark in hand. He didn't look at me. The kids, now lanky teenagers with earbuds and screens, stood like shadows in the background. One of them might have nodded, or maybe I imagined that. I stepped inside, careful not to brush against Isolde's shoulder. The silence settled like courtroom dust, waiting for a verdict no one planned to deliver. I'd memorized every corner of this house when it was mine to clean, decorate, and fight for. But now, it felt like someone else's curated version of my life. The walls wore new paint, cool grays replacing the warm ochres I once loved. Every picture frame held a memory that excluded me. Family vacations, graduations, birthdays, cropped and curated to erase my presence. I paused at the hallway wall and saw a gap where a photo of us once hung. Isolde at 10, hugging me with cake on her cheek. Gone. Then, in the living room, I saw it. The quilt. The one I spent weeks stitching together with fabric from Isolde's baby dresses, school shirts, and scraps from my old aprons. It lay on the floor, its edges chewed, its center furred, a dog bed. "Nice of you to reuse things," I murmured, eyes fixed on the worn fabric. Isolde glanced over her shoulder. Didn't say a word, just kept arranging the centerpiece on the coffee table as if silence could rearrange truth. I'd wrapped the grandchildren's gifts in blue and silver paper with names carefully penned in gold. A puzzle set for Adam, a book series for Ella. I placed them gently beneath the tree, which blinked in sterile white lights, none of the colorful chaos I used to love. An hour later, I wandered upstairs for a moment alone. That's when I found it. My gifts gone from under the tree. In the hallway closet, I spotted the wrapping paper I'd used, torn and crumpled. Nearby, a luxury brand shopping bag sat front and center under the tree now, tagged with my name. But I hadn't bought designer. I leaned down and peeked inside. A smartwatch, the kind kids begged for. I turned the tag over and saw the faint scratch of a different pen stroke beneath mine. I found the original label tucked in the trash nearby. Gareth. He bought it, but made it look like it came from me. I slipped the label into my pocket, didn't say a word. Raina, the maid, was older than I remembered, or maybe the job had aged her. She brought me tea in a delicate cup and whispered as she set it down, "They treat everyone like this. Especially blood." I looked at her, really looked. She had a bruise on her wrist, faint but fresh. I wanted to ask, but years of silence had made me cautious. She added, "I see things, Mrs. Morley. Just so you know, you're not alone." I nodded, eyes fixed on the swirling steam. Maybe I wasn't the only one being erased. Dinner smelled good, too perfect. Roast duck, rosemary potatoes, a salad I didn't touch. We sat in stiff chairs like guests at a museum. No one asked me how I'd been. Isolde passed the rolls. Gareth poured the wine. The kids chewed with the indifference of screens. And me? My fork was different. Mismatched. Old. Possibly from a box I donated years ago. Everyone else had silver. I had irony. I took a sip of the lukewarm tea Raina had served earlier. It tasted stronger now, maybe from the truth she poured into it. I looked around the table and thought, I'm not family, I'm audience. I excused myself before dessert. Said something about needing air. On the porch, the light flickered. I pulled out a cigarette I didn't plan to smoke and lit it with hands steadier than I expected. I hadn't smoked in a decade. But tonight I needed the taste of defiance. The clock ticked louder than the silence. I lay on the stiff guest bed, its sheets tucked too tightly, its pillows thin with polite neglect. The digital glow read 12:03 a.m., but time had long since lost meaning. The house breathed with a rhythm I no longer knew, creaks, distant thuds, and muffled laughter from a decade ago, still echoing in my head. I sat up. My feet met the cold floor as I padded across the room, drawn to the old oak desk in the corner. Its surface was clean, sterile, almost too perfect, but the drawer underneath, it wasn't fully shut. A sliver of metal from the lock gleamed at me like an invitation. I pulled. It resisted, but then gave way with a quiet snap. Inside, yellowed envelopes lay in disarray. Some still sealed, others torn open crudely. I recognized the handwriting on each. Mine. Birthday cards, Christmas wishes, even just because notes. Every message I had sent to Gareth and the kids, all returned, ignored, or worse, scribbled on with crayon doodles and grocery lists. My fingers shook as I sifted through them. One card had a snowflake design I spent hours embroidering. Another was a pop-up card I chose specifically for Clara's 5th birthday. She never saw it. They were all here, all of them, not lost, not forgotten, hidden. I wasn't crying. I couldn't. The ache had moved beyond tears. I sat there, reading words I had once written in love, now twisted by time and silence. Then it slid out. A small note tucked inside a red envelope. It was Gareth's handwriting, unmistakable blocky print, dated 5 years ago. I can't stand her drama. Stop her mail if needed. She's not stable. Each word landed like a gavel, the final verdict in a trial I never knew was happening. My jaw clenched. Not stable. After I had picked up their rent when Gareth lost his job, after I co-signed their first mortgage, that kind of loyalty gets labeled unstable now? I folded the note and placed it back, not out of forgiveness, but out of strategy. There was more to find. The Bible on the nightstand wasn't the one I remembered. This one looked newer. I picked it up, thumbing through, pretending I needed scripture for peace. But really, I followed instinct. Proverbs 28, "The wicked flee when no one pursues." There, wedged into the page, was an old bank statement, folded 3 times. The logo of Jasper Company, my late husband's estate manager, sat in the corner like a ghost. I opened it. A transfer, $10,000, from the estate, to Gareth, dated 3 months after Harold died. My name was nowhere on it. My heart didn't race. My blood didn't boil. I simply understood. I had trusted Gareth to handle Harold's estate. I believed in delegation, in family, and now I saw the price. I took a photo, then another in better light. The paper trembled, not from my hands, but from the rage sealed into its fibers. This wasn't just oversight. This was theft with a smile. I put the Bible back. The pages still held the scent of cheap cologne and betrayal. Then came the flashback, sharp and painful. I had once sat in the lawyer's office, Harold's will in my lap and Gareth's hand on my shoulder. "We'll take care of everything," he had said. "You've done enough, Mom." And I had believed him. I'd gone home, trusting him to split things fairly, trusting him to see me as more than a checkbook with gray hair. But I had underestimated the hunger of entitlement. I returned everything as I'd found it, slid the drawer shut, straightened the Bible. Picked up my phone and scrolled through old contacts until I saw one name I hadn't thought of in years. Elaine Parks, Harold's estate lawyer. I didn't call her. Not yet. I stood up straighter than I had in years. Some betrayals don't shatter you, they sharpen you. The morning light slanted across the kitchen tile as I stepped into the dining room, already full. The family sat in polite silence, each place setting pristine, except for the empty space where my chair should have been. No one offered an explanation. I pulled a wooden chair from the corner, its legs scraping the floor like a violin out of tune. I sat. No one looked up. Isolde poured orange juice into 3 glasses, hers, Gareth's, and one of the kids. The jug was set down without another glance. I stood, walked to the kitchen, and filled a mug with the last of the coffee. The pot hissed, as if in protest. Gareth, buttering toast, finally spoke. "You're early." I stirred cream into my cup. I never left. The butter knife paused midair, then resumed its motion with too much force. Raina entered, her arms careful, face unreadable. She set a delicate teacup by my plate. "For you," she said softly, and left. I stared at the cup. No steam. I picked it up, tilted it. A light scent, chamomile maybe. But something about her voice made my hands tighten. Later, as she passed by again, Raina leaned down and whispered quickly, "That cup was meant for someone else." My stomach didn't turn. It settled with icy focus. I excused myself from the table and brought the teacup to the windowsill, setting it near a potted plant. Then I returned with the kitchen mug, sipping slowly. When I sat back down, Gareth cleared his throat. "Estate matters can get messy," he said, loud enough for the kids to hear. "Especially when old memories cloud legal clarity." His eyes never left mine. Isolde laughed. Too loud, too rehearsed. "Oh, Gareth, not this again." I smiled thinly. "I agree. It's always messier when someone hides the will." A fork clinked against a plate. Silence stretched. I reached for a napkin. Later, I wandered through the living room, my coffee now cold in my hand. A new frame on the wall caught my eye. It was a photo, our family at Christmas, years ago. I remembered that day. The red velvet table runner, the broken ornament underfoot, my hand on Isolde's shoulder. But in the photo, my place had been replaced with a lamp, a floor lamp with a pleated shade, standing exactly where I had. I stepped closer, almost nose to glass. The seam where my shoulder should have been was blurred, imperfect. They hadn't just cropped me out, they'd replaced me. I reached up and tilted the frame slightly, just enough to make it obvious to someone who noticed. Not broken, just off. Raina found me on the back porch, pretending to admire the frost-wilted roses. She handed me a folded slip of paper and whispered, "He's watching your phone. Don't text anyone." I took the note without reading it, sliding it into my cardigan pocket. I gave her a small, grateful nod. Then I stretched, arms overhead, spine cracking, and looked up at the sky. The clouds were thinning. The silence between us was louder than ever. But I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to argue. Some storms arrive not with thunder, but with stillness. The backyard looked like a postcard. Strings of soft white lights hung between the trees, casting a glow on the patio where laughter danced over the rim of wine glasses. Gareth's laugh came through loudest, that same smug chuckle I used to mistake for charm. I stood quietly at the sliding door for a moment before stepping out, careful not to interrupt the merriment too soon. I noticed Raina's absence first. Her calm presence always softened the edges of this house. The new maid, a much younger woman with darting eyes, avoided mine entirely. Isolde offered me a chair, but it was too late. Gareth had already taken the last one. I sat on the low stone border of the garden, the cool texture grounding me as I watched their theater. They hadn't expected me to show up, let alone stay. But I was done playing the disappearing act in my own family. "I received something interesting today," I said, pulling a folded letter from my purse with deliberate grace. The laughter died mid-chuckle. Isolde's smile froze. Gareth's eyes narrowed, calculating. "This is from the estate attorney. Seems there was a discrepancy in the distribution of my late husband's assets." I unfolded the letter fully and read aloud, voice steady. Client Marjorie Ann Lovelace is entitled to equal inheritance under the original estate terms. Failure to deliver this portion may constitute legal fraud. Silence. You could hear the soft hum of the neighbor's wind chimes. Gareth opened his mouth to speak. Not today, I cut in, folding the letter again with care. You've had your turn. Isolde rose quickly, red in the face, and lunged to grab the letter. In her haste, it slipped through her fingers, landing squarely in a puddle of Merlot. The ink bled crimson as if the truth itself was bleeding out. You always wanted more than you deserved, she hissed. I met her gaze, unflinching. And you always hid behind the wine glass. The patio felt smaller, the air tighter. I stood up slowly, the stone pressing against my palms as I pushed off. This time I towered over them, not in stature, but in spirit. I'm filing a claim, I said, voice unwavering. And I won't be silent anymore. I turned and walked inside, leaving the screen door wide open behind me. The wind blew through, sweeping the tablecloth slightly askew. Footsteps followed, Gareth's. You'll lose everything, he said softly, venom masked in velvet. I stopped in the hallway, just before the staircase. I've already lost more than you could count, I replied, not turning around. Back in my guest room, I laid out the letters, those yellowed, unopened cards once intended for birthdays and holidays. Each one was a memory gagged by time and arrogance. One by one, I took photographs of them with my phone. I sent the images to the estate attorney, then emailed them to myself for safekeeping. My late husband's note sat beside them, its familiar ink a ghostly echo. Protect what's yours, even if it's only your voice. I whispered aloud, the words shaping resolve. I'm doing exactly that. The night didn't fall. It collapsed, and I stood in its debris, unafraid. The house was too quiet, unnaturally so. After dinner, no one lingered. Plates were cleared in silence, chairs pushed back without a word. Gareth disappeared upstairs. Isolde poured herself a drink and stared out the window, and the replacement maid kept to corners like a shadow. I waited until the grandfather clock chimed 10 before slipping into the study. The desktop still ran warm from recent use. I clicked the folder labeled Mom's Things and felt the chill wash over me. Empty. Every photo, every birthday video, every document I had scanned from court archives. Gone. I checked the recycling bin. Also empty. I opened the video software, scrolling back through the recent deletions. There should have been a video of my late husband. The one where he looked into the camera, hands folded, and said, Marjorie will handle everything. But there was nothing. Then came the sound behind me. Click. I turned slowly. Isolde leaned against the doorframe, spinning a flash drive between her fingers. Some things don't belong in history, she said. I said nothing, only watched her, memorizing the smug arch of her brow, the way her nails tapped rhythm on plastic. She walked away without another word. They weren't just erasing me from the present, they were rewriting the past. The next morning, I got a call from the bank. Mrs. Morley, we flagged a transaction, $2,800 at Dior on your card ending in 7745. I blinked. That card hasn't left my wallet. It was declined for suspicion, the woman continued, but we recommend freezing it. I agreed, thanked her, and ended the call. I already knew. I went to Gareth, standing near the garage. He shrugged. Maybe you forgot you bought it. That happens with age. I didn't answer. I took the card from my purse, snapped it in half, and let the pieces fall at his feet. Behind me, I heard Isolde laugh, too quickly. Very dramatic, she said. I turned. No. Drama is pretending your lies are misunderstandings. Then I walked away. That afternoon, I passed the open kitchen and caught Gareth's voice low and snide. "She'll be gone soon. Focus on Raina's birthday. She's earned it." Isolde chimed in. "Cake, streamers, the whole thing. Post it. For the woman who truly keeps this house standing." My birthday, not Raina's. I stood there, listening, invisible again. Later, I found Raina's room. I didn't knock. I slid a folded printout of the Facebook post under her door. No note. No words. She'd understand. That night, I sat with the letters again. One envelope had a note in Michael's familiar script, aged and fading. "If they ever try to erase you, leave louder than they expect." I traced the line with my finger. Then I stood up and whispered, "I plan to." Before bed, I went to the living room. The family photo on the wall, crooked once, straightened once, still hung in smug symmetry. I reached into my purse and pulled out a snapshot from years ago. Me, Michael, Gareth as a boy. No edits, no filters. I slipped it into the frame behind the glass. Isolde passed by, saw it. She didn't speak, just watched as I turned and walked upstairs. She knew what it meant. It wasn't war yet, but the weapons were drawn, and I had just loaded mine. I came down to the kitchen that morning to the scent of over-brewed coffee and a table already set, like they were expecting me. Gareth greeted me with a grin too wide, his voice syrupy as he said, "Morning, Mom. Your coffee's hot, and your medication's right there." He gestured to the small orange bottle beside my mug. I sat slowly, taking in the room like a stranger watching a stage play. Isolde buttered toast with mechanical efficiency, her eyes never meeting mine. I smiled, polite and distant, and tucked the bottle into my robe pocket without opening it. Later in the guest room, I looked up the label online. Wrong dosage. Wrong manufacturer. I hadn't used that brand in over 2 years. From the hallway, Raina's soft gaze met mine. She gave the slightest nod, then vanished. I wasn't alone in this house of mirrors. I locked myself in the guest room and called Camille, my friend and former attorney. "Marjorie, I can't help you," she said. Her voice was stiff, unfamiliar. "What do you mean? You've handled my documents for decades." "There's been a change," she said, tone clipped. "Our firm no longer deals with family litigation. Conflict of interest." I paused. "You didn't even ask who I'm litigating against." Click. A few taps later, I found her new job listing on LinkedIn. In-house counsel, Westcroft Holdings, Gareth's latest business shell. My breath caught in my throat, but I smiled into the silence. Checkmate. Not yet. I headed outside, keys in hand, determined to visit the courthouse. My car greeted me with a soft whir, then silence. It refused to start. The mechanic's voice over the phone was apologetic. "Looks like someone poured sugar in your gas tank, ma'am. I'm sorry." "Don't be," I said, almost laughing. I turned and found Raina at the end of the driveway, her arms folded. "My cousin's car is out back," she said softly. "You can use it. He won't ask questions." I nodded. "Tell him I'm going to the courthouse." But I didn't. Instead, I went downtown, to the press office. I didn't knock on legal doors. I knocked on ones that had microphones. That night, the house was quiet, but the air buzzed like a storm waiting to drop. I walked into the dining room and laid a thick manila envelope on the table. Everyone was there. Gareth, Isolde, Raina. "This is for each of you," I said, voice calm, nearly gentle. They opened the envelopes. Inside were copies, photos, printed emails, bank records, surveillance shots of someone slipping something into the sugar tin near my coffee station. Also included, Camille's contract with Gareth's firm, the mechanic's report, a pharmacy printout showing my correct prescription. "You started this," I said. "I'm just documenting it." They stared, but no one spoke. No one denied it. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the voice recorder on my phone. "This is Marjorie Ann C." I began, clear and steady. "Date, time, location. This is my voice, my story, my protection." I detailed everything, every twist, every wound disguised as a gesture. I spoke like I was leaving a legacy. "They always thought I was too soft to fight back," I said, almost whispering. "But soft doesn't mean stupid." I uploaded the file to a hidden cloud folder labeled M Archive. Just in case, I wouldn't be erased. Not quietly. The dining table, once a place of shared laughter and seasonal centerpieces, now looked more like a courtroom bench. I stood at the head of it, my palms resting flat against the polished wood, grounding myself. Gareth and Isolde sat across from me, stiff, their wine glasses untouched. Their children lingered on the fringes, wide-eyed, clearly sensing something seismic in the air. "We used to share meals," I began, my voice even. "Tonight, we share truths." I tapped the screen of my tablet. The voice of Howard, my late husband, filled the room, his southern cadence soft, steady, resolute. "If anything should happen to me," he said, "Marjorie has full control of the estate. She knows what's best for our family." The silence that followed was brittle. No one dared move. Isolde's nails dug into her own palm. Gareth's jaw tightened. My heart pounded, but my face remained calm. I had practiced this moment 100 times, but nothing prepared me for the real tremble of justice landing softly like snowfall. When the recording ended, the children looked down at their laps. Even they understood. That voice from the past was not just a ghost, it was proof. I walked toward the mantel and, without a word, removed the family photo hanging above the fireplace. The one they had edited, cropping me out like a smudge. From my purse, I pulled out the replacement, a candid image of Howard, a young Isolde, and me, arms wrapped around each other under the cottonwood tree in our first home. The frame clicked into place. "Truth," I said, turning to face them again, "looks better in full." Isolde's face cracked first. She stood slowly, eyes locked on the new photograph. This is petty," she whispered. "All this over a few dollars?" I stepped forward, my voice low but unwavering. "No, all this over erasure." I placed the stack of documents on the table. Howard's will, the tampered bank statement, the medical record showing altered prescriptions, and the return to sender cards. "You may have erased me from your memories," I continued, "but you can't erase what's signed, recorded, and remembered." Gareth said nothing. For once, he seemed unsure of which lie to stand on. The children leaned in. Isolde dropped her gaze. "I never asked for more than love," I said. But even that came stamped insufficient funds. The table was a minefield of exposed truths, and each page I placed felt like another match lit beneath their seats. Isolde sat back down, suddenly small in her chair. "We needed the assets, not the affection." I inhaled deeply, almost smiling. "Well, then you've got what you came for," I replied. I didn't wait for a rebuttal. I turned, nodded to Raina, who stood quietly at the door, and took my coat from her extended arms. She had known, she had seen, she had stayed. Without raising my voice, I turned back to them all. Some people burn bridges, others light them. I just crossed mine. And with that, I stepped into the hallway. Behind me, chairs scraped against the floor. But I didn't flinch. I didn't turn back. Raina followed a few steps behind. I slipped her a small envelope. "For you," I said, "to start with clarity." She blinked, surprised, then clutched it to her chest. Outside, the air was sharp, cool with Texas winter. I didn't shiver. I walked toward my future as if the shadows at my back were just wind. Behind the door, a family changed forever watched my departing back, knowing the real me wasn't silent anymore. The morning light hit the porch in that quiet, honest way only December can offer. I stood still for a long time, my suitcase beside me. though I had no plans to leave. The door behind me was closed, not locked, just politely shut, like someone unsure whether they wanted you to come back in. But I didn't need to. Not anymore. The front door was dotted with sticky notes in various pastel shades, reminders for groceries, a plumber appointment, trash collection, all of them written by Isolde's careful hand, slightly tilted letters, her way of controlling chaos. They weren't meant for me. I wasn't part of this house's pulse anymore. Between a yellow call electricity company and a pink tofu 2-packs, a folded envelope caught my eye. I slid it out with slow fingers. It was a formal letter from the estate lawyer. My claim had passed arbitration. I won. No appeals, no delays. Just black ink confirming what I already knew deep in my bones. I was right. I sat on the edge of the porch, letting the morning sun warm my shoulders. A strange calm settled over me. Not the absence of feeling, but a stillness earned after long storms. I walked to the edge of the front yard, map in hand. A legal parcel map now bearing my name. My fingers traced the borders of the property, some familiar lines, others I hadn't known existed. A small triangle at the back, hidden in earlier conversations, was mine now too. I imagined Gareth skipping over it during paperwork, assuming I'd never notice. But here it was, clearly marked, legally mine. The wind tugged at the edges of the map, flipping it over like pages in a story they never wanted me to read. The past was full of erasures, silences, paper trails rerouted. But this was ink on the earth. Across the street, blinds shifted, a curtain fluttered. Mrs. Healy from 3 doors down stood watering her lawn in a Christmas apron, though it was still morning. She looked over at me, then nodded, not with pity, not with shame. Just a nod, a human gesture, recognition. Others peeked too. I could feel them watching, not in malice, but quiet reverence. They'd heard shouting in the past, seen me arrive with gifts and leave without hugs. No one had said anything. But today, the silence wasn't complicity, it was acknowledgement. I found a small white envelope wedged in the front gate later that morning. Neat handwriting I recognized. MJ from down the block. We'd never had coffee, but she always waved. Inside, a note. Dinner's on me tonight. I saw. I'm proud. I pressed the envelope to my chest, heart aching in the best way. The dining room was empty when I walked in. Chairs pushed under the table, the ghost of conversation still clinging to the walls. I sat for a while, not in sadness but vision. I imagined new people at this table, not family by blood, but people who laughed with me, not at me. People who asked about my day. People who stayed when silence fell. I could see it. A holiday meal, candles flickering, new warmth. This room didn't have to be a battlefield anymore. Back in the guest room, the one they had once called temporary, though I'd slept there for years, I found a blank sheet of paper and began to write. Not to Isolde, not Gareth, just to me. You have walked through their rejection and didn't flinch. You have stood in the storm and held your ground. From now on, you will not chase apologies. You will not beg for space. You will build your own. I folded the letter and slid it into the top drawer of the old desk. A promise not to forget again. I caught my reflection in the mirror as I stood. The woman staring back wasn't just someone's mother. She was someone, whole, resilient, reclaimed. The door closed softly behind me, but the air didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. The house was still, cloaked in that gentle hush before sunrise. I stood in the living room, watching as light filtered through the blinds and rested on the family photo that now hung above the mantel. It wasn't the one they had chosen. It was mine. Me, Howard, and little Isolde, frozen in a moment before life got complicated. I walked over, lifted the frame carefully, and slid it into my bag. I wasn't erasing her, just reclaiming the space she left behind. The wall looked bare without it, but somehow more honest. There was strength in the emptiness, like a pause between movements in a symphony. In that silence, I whispered to the room, "This is the beginning, not the end." I hadn't expected mail, not after the storm we had weathered, but there it was, on the front table. A single envelope with no return address. The handwriting hesitant, but unmistakably hers. "I'm sorry I let you fade," the note read, ending with a small, lopsided heart. Isolde. I sat down, letter trembling in my hands. There was no flourish, no grand apology, just those words. I read them again, slower this time, letting their weight settle into my chest. It wasn't absolution, but it was real, and that counted for more than any grand gesture. The corners of my mouth lifted, not a smile exactly, but something close. The kitchen smelled of toasted bread and fresh coffee. As I filled my mug, Raina appeared in the doorway, apron dusted with flour, her eyes kind but distant. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Instead, she began to hum. The tune was faint, familiar, an old lullaby I used to sing when Isolde was a child. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. I nodded to Raina. She nodded back. No words exchanged. Just the quiet bond of two women who had endured, who had seen too much and said too little. In her presence, I found something close to peace. Later that morning, I opened the door wide and set the table for brunch. Real food, real company. Word must have spread because the neighbors came. Mr. Dillard brought deviled eggs. MJ handed me a vase of her backyard roses without saying a word. They didn't ask questions. They just showed up. That was enough. Then Isolde appeared at the gate. She walked slowly, not with guilt, but with a kind of weary recognition. I didn't rush to her. I didn't open my arms. But when she met my eyes across the yard, she gave a small nod, one that said, "I see you now." And that too was enough. In the quiet of my room, I sat with pen and paper, words forming faster than I could write. "Dear me, thank you for not disappearing. Thank you for staying loud when they tried to mute you. You've walked through fire and found your reflection intact. Keep speaking. Yours truly, the woman who arrived." I folded the note and placed it beside the photo of Howard, his smile eternal, his memory intact. And I smiled back, not the broken mother, not the forgotten wife, just me, whole. The morning came without fanfare, no clatter of dishes from the kitchen, no murmurs of hushed conversations behind closed doors, just stillness. I lay there for a long while in the guest bed that had, strangely, come to feel like home, the kind of home that doesn't need permission to exist. The soft rustle of the trees outside the window reminded me that life was moving, unconcerned with grudges or apologies. When I finally pushed back the blanket and swung my feet onto the floor, I noticed something. The absence of tension. It wasn't gone because they had changed. It was gone because I moved through the hallway, past the quiet dining room and into the kitchen. No new maid, no fake smiles, just me, the ceramic coffee mug, and the hum of the refrigerator. I poured a cup, black and hot, and leaned against the counter. This was the same kitchen where I had been offered the wrong pills. The same kitchen where I had stood alone while others toasted to things I wasn't part of. Now, the silence felt different, not isolating, not cruel, just mine. I returned to the guest room, my room, and pulled out the box I had hidden in the back of the closet. Inside were all the birthday and holiday cards I had once mailed with hope and desperation. Each envelope bore my handwriting, softened by time and creased at the corners, messages written with trembling faith. Love never reciprocated. I laid them out on the small writing desk. A corkboard stood empty in the corner, one I had meant to use for meal plans or reminders. Instead, I tacked each card onto it, one by one, lining them up like soldiers in formation, not to fight, but to be seen. At the top of the board, I pinned a hand-lettered sign, "My heart speaks too." Some cards were unopened, others were torn at the edges as though they'd been mishandled, but they all shared one thing: my voice, my hope, my presence. They were reminders that I existed, I loved, and even if ignored, I left a trace. It wasn't about reclaiming what I lost. It was about honoring what I gave. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed softly with mid-morning routines. I stood at the window, sipping coffee as a neighbor passed with her dog. MJ, from 2 houses down, waved gently. I waved back. No words exchanged, none needed. Isolde's car was parked across the street. She didn't look up from her phone as I walked past the window. We hadn't spoken since brunch, and I didn't expect we would, but there was no bitterness. Not anymore. When our eyes met from afar, I didn't flinch. I nodded, slow, calm, unshaken. She didn't wave back, but she didn't look away, either. Sometimes, distance is the truest form of peace. We both understood the space between us wasn't punishment. It was protection. That afternoon, I opened a can of soft cream paint I had found in the garage, a forgotten relic from when we still talked about renovations and someday projects. With each stroke of the brush across the wall, I felt something loosen. Every sweep was deliberate, not just color, but renewal. A way to make the room mine, completely and quietly. When I finished, I stood in the middle of the space, breathing in the faint scent of fresh paint and memory. It wasn't just a guest room anymore. It was a declaration, a sanctuary. Not every rebuild requires demolition. Sometimes it's a shift of hue, a reclaiming of corners. As the light began to soften toward late afternoon, I returned to the front window. A small pair of birds had made the ledge their perch, tiny bodies balancing against the wind, calm, unfazed. I watched them for a while, thinking back to who I was before all this began. I whispered to the glass, "I told you I'd stand here someday." And I meant it. With slow resolve, I walked over to the desk, opened the top drawer, pulled out the small letter I had started weeks ago but never finished. This time, I wrote just one line more. "I forgive you for doubting your own strength." Then I folded it, placed it beside the photo of Howard and me from decades ago, and closed the drawer. No locks, no hiding, just closure. I took one last look at the room, picked up the old key from the windowsill, and slipped it into my pocket, not as a need, but as a keepsake. When I stepped out onto the porch, the air felt warm, steady. The kind of warmth that didn't come from others, but from within. I didn't need applause or praise. I just needed to close that door, for good. Sunlight flowed across the living room like reassurance. I stood in front of the fireplace, watching light dance on the family photograph I'd placed back on the wall. The genuine one, with Howard's arm around me and little Isolde's cheek pressed against mine. No edits, just us, whole and unfiltered. I moved to the kitchen, where I made myself a cup of chamomile. No urgency, just quiet intention. The steam curled upward, carrying with it a scent of calm. I took it to the front door and swung it wide. This was my house, but more importantly, it was mine again, in a way that extended beyond walls and windows. By mid-morning, neighbors began drifting in, drawn perhaps by the warmth. Mr. Dillard brought over pastries in a wicker basket, and even MJ, the quiet lady next door, arrived with a thermos of her legendary mulled cider. We sat around my kitchen table, swapping small stories about tree lights and holiday mishaps. No mention of past wounds. Just stories, smiles, and a community feeling the shift. Later, I found myself placing Isolde's apology note into a small frame, positioning it next to the photo of Howard on the mantel. I paused and whispered, "Maybe not perfect, but true steps forward." a sentiment that felt tender and fierce all at once. In the afternoon, I walked to the park down the street. The air was crisp, tree branches bare in gentle defiance. I sat on the old wooden bench, notebook open in my lap, pen ready. I began writing. Gratitude for the storms I'd weathered, pride for the silence transformed into strength, and a promise for the story that was still mine. A passerby jogged by and nodded. No words, but unmistakable acknowledgement. As dusk approached, I returned home and opened the small drawer in my dresser marked for when I forget. Inside rested the letter I wrote to myself, once needed, no longer essential. I folded it again and tucked it securely away, a reminder that I've come too far to lose sight of my own worth. From the hallway mirror, I caught my reflection. The woman looking back was no longer burdened by longing or defined by shadows. She stood tall, content with her own presence. I closed the door behind me softly, not shutting anything away, but leaning fully into a life rebuilt on quiet conviction. Sometimes the hardest journeys aren't the ones we take with a suitcase, but the ones we take within ourselves. I used to think silence was strength, that enduring in the background was noble, but I've learned that speaking up, even if your voice trembles, is the real act of courage. I hope my story reminded you that boundaries aren't betrayals, and that reclaiming your worth is never too late, no matter how many years have passed. What would you have done if you were me? Have you ever had to find your voice in a house full of silence? If this story touched your heart, leave a 1 in the comments, or let me know where you're watching from. And if it didn't resonate with you, I'd still love to hear why. Your voice matters too. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to hear more real stories that move, heal, and challenge us. Because sometimes, all it takes is one voice to remind someone they're not alone.